Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirtz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Aleph Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, Siman Shin Lamed Vav Sif Ches. Interesting sif that we have here. So over the last couple of days, we've been discussing Toilish Zayreya, especially when it comes to flower pots. And when we discuss flower pots, we have 2 different types of flower pots. We talk about an otzitz nokuv, a flower pot that has a hole in it, and an otzitz she'eino nokuv, a flower pot that does not have a hole. Now, when we have an otzitz nokuv, when we have a flower pot that has a hole, and it's sitting on the ground, we consider whatever's in the flower pot to be mechubar lekarka. You have an otzitz nokuv, you have something growing in a flower pot, there's a hole at the bottom of the flower pot, and we say that by virtue of that hole, whatever's in the flower pot is mamish mechubar lekarka. If you go ahead and you toilish something from that flower pot, that would be the Issa Daraisa of toilish. Now, how about if you pick up the flower pot? Well, if you pick up the flower pot and you put it on top of something that is going to interpose between the flower pot and the ground. So let's say the flower pot is sitting on the ground. You pick up the flower pot, you put it on a table. Well, now you have severed the connection to the ground. It was considered connected to the ground by virtue of the hole, and it was exposed to the ground. Now that you've taken the flower pot and you've put it on a table, it's no longer exposed to the ground. So by doing so, we say that you have severed the connection between the flower pot and the ground. By doing that, you're over toilish. That would be toilish daraisa. So again, you had a flower pot with a hole. It was exposed to the ground. You picked it up. You put it on top of a table. It's no longer exposed to the ground. Toilish daraisa. Now, how about the other way? How about if you have a flower pot with a hole and it's sitting on a table? And now you take it, you put it down on the ground. Well, now what you've done is Zayreya. You've planted it. How have you planted it? Well, you've connected it to the ground. Since you've now exposed the hole in the bottom of the flower pot to the ground, that's as if you just planted the flower pot, and that would be Zayreya. Okay, that's pretty simple to understand. Now let's go to a little bit of a different case. Let's say the flower pot with a hole, the otzitz nokuv, is sitting on the ground. And what you do is you take it and you pick it up. So you elevate it. Before it was sitting on the ground. Now you pick it up 3 feet off the ground. But you didn't put it on top of anything else. You didn't put something under the flower pot. It's still exposed to the ground. All you've done is you've elevated it. Before it was sitting on the ground, or maybe before it wasn't sitting on the ground, maybe before it was sitting within 6 inches of the ground. But now you went ahead and you picked it up, and you put it, let's say, on top of stakes. So you have some kind of a tripod or something sitting on the ground, and you take the flower pot off the ground, and you put it up on top of those stakes. But there's still nothing underneath the flower pot serving as an interposition between the flower pot and the ground. It's still exposed to the ground. Is that a problem? Or how about the other way? How about if you have this flower pot that's otzitz nokuv on some kind of a tripod, where it's exposed to the ground, and it's 3 feet up, and now you take it off the tripod and you put it down on the ground. Is that a problem of Zayreya? In both of these cases, the flower pot was exposed to the ground before you did what you did, and it continues to be exposed to the ground after you did what you did. So in neither case are you either severing the connection between the flower pot and the ground, or are you, in the case where you take it off the tripod and put it on the ground, you're not now connecting it to the ground for the first time. It already was, so to speak, connected because it's an otzitz nokuv. How about, so in those cases, is there a problem of toilish? Is there a problem of Zayreya? Now the answer is that the Gemara tells us that there is. This is a Gemara on Pei Aleph Amid Beis. The Gemara on Pei Aleph Amid Beis says that if somebody takes an otzitz nokuv off the ground and puts it up on stakes, he's over because of toilish. And the lashon of the Gemara is chayiv. Mishum Toilish. So the Gemara seems to say that this is Toilish. And the opposite, the Gemara says, if you take the Otzitz Nokov off the stakes and you put it down on the ground, that's Zoreya. Now, what's the explanation of this? It would seem that the explanation is, while it's true that if the Otzitz Nokov was on the ground, it was connected to the ground, and when you elevate it, it's still connected to the ground, and you haven't severed the connection, while that is true, but what you have done is, you have diminished the plant's ability to be yonik, to draw nourishment from the ground. Before you did your action, before you elevated the Otzitz Nokov off the ground, it was close to the ground, and it was able, because of its proximity to the ground, it was able to draw more nourishment. Maybe it was able to draw the nourishment easier. It's more connected to the ground because of its proximity to the ground. When you elevate it, you're diminishing the ability of the plant to draw nourishment from the ground, and that is somewhat toilish. And the other way, if it's 3 feet up in the air, and then you lower it and you bring it down to the ground, you are increasing the ability of the plant to be yonik from the ground, and we look at that as some form of Zoreya. Now, having said that, I told you that the Gemara on Pei Aleph uses a lashon of chayiv. If you elevate it, you're chayiv for toilish. If you lower it, you're chayiv for Zoreya. Question is, what does this chayiv mean? By this point in Chel Gimel, we are used to interpreting chayiv as connoting an issa daraisa, and osur as connoting an issa darabanan, or potter as connoting an issa darabanan. Over here, the Gemara says chayiv. Chayiv sounds like an issa daraisa, but it happens to be that this is a machlokes rishonim. You have Rashi and some other rishonim, Rashi, the Meiri, the Ritva. They suggest that this is only an issa darabanan, and we can understand why it would be only an issa darabanan. Because again, when you elevate it, you're not severing the connection. When you lower it, you're not initiating the connection. So we can understand why it would be an issa darabanan. However, the Arzaruah and the Rambam, according to the Maggid Mishnah says that the Rambam holds that this is mamish an issa daraisa. You lower it, it's mamish Zoreya. You elevate it, it's mamish toilish, and it would be an issa daraisa. So now, let's just give a little synopsis of what we've just said. You've got an Otzitz Nokov. It's sitting on the ground. You elevate it off the ground. The Gemara says that this is osur. Gemara says chayiv. Machlokes rishonim. According to Rashi, when you elevate it, it's an issa darabanan. What's the issa darabanan? Again, you're diminishing the ability of the plant to draw nourishment from the ground. That's epis, severing the connection to the ground. It's also midrabanan. According to the Rambam, says the Maggid Mishnah, according to the Arzaruah, this is an issa daraisa. Somehow this is considered severing the connection. The opposite case, you take the Otzitz Nokov and you lower it to the ground. According to Rashi, issa darabanan. Why? Because you're increasing the ability of the plant to draw nourishment from the ground. It's epis planting it. According to the Rambam, according to the Arzaruah, it's a daraisa of Zoreya. Now, so far, we've been talking about an Otzitz Nokov, a flower pot with a hole. How about if we talk about an Otzitz She'eino Nokov, a flower pot that doesn't have a hole? Now, right away, you're going to say, if it's an Otzitz She'eino Nokov, so how could there be a problem here? An Otzitz She'eino Nokov is not considered connected to the ground. If you pick it up, how could there be a problem? You're not severing any connection. And the other case, the Otzitz She'eino Nokov, you take it and you put it down on the ground, how could you be doing Zoreya? There's no connection between what's in the flower pot and the ground. It's an Otzitz She'eino Nokov. Yet the Mechaber is going to tell us that you're not allowed to do this by an Otzitz She'eino Nokov, the same way you're not allowed to do it by an Otzitz Nokov. Now the truth is, when you look at that halacha against the backdrop of the machlokes rishonim that I just told you about, you can understand, at least according to the Rambam and the Arzaruah, where we're saying that by an Otzitz Nokov, these are Isurei Daraisa. So then we can understand that there could be an Issa Darabanan. We're going to be geyser the Otzitz She'eino Nokov onto the Otzitz Nokov. We're not going to allow you to elevate an otzitz she'enoi nakuv, because you might come to elevate an otzitz nakuv. We're not going to let you put an otzitz she'enoi nakuv on the ground, because you might come to put an otzitz nakuv on the ground. So if the otzitz nakuv is an issa daraisa, we certainly could see room for an issa darabanan by an otzitz she'enoi nakuv. But what do we do with the shittas that say that even the otzitz she'enoi nakuv is only Yisurei D'Rabbanan? What do we do with shittas Rashi? If the otzitz she'enoi nakuv is only an issa d'Rabbanan, why would we aser an otzitz she'enoi nakuv? Again, I think I misspoke. If the otzitz nakuv is only Yisurei D'Rabbanan, why would we aser the otzitz she'enoi nakuv? L'chayr, that should be 100% mutter. Now, the mechaber over here in Sif, we're on the wrong page. The mechaber over here on Sif Ches is going to tell us that the otzitz she'enoi nakuv is aser. His lashon is yesh lizaher. It's something you should be careful. You shouldn't do. The Biur Halacha is going to tell us, and he has rayas, that the mechaber paskins like Rashi. The mechaber paskins that the otzitz nakuv presents only Yisurei Daraisa. So if the otzitz nakuv presents only Yisurei D'Rabbanan. Now, again, if the otzitz nakuv presents only Yisurei D'Rabbanan, why would we aser the otzitz she'enoi nakuv? So the Chavetz Chaim in the Biur Halacha, I think the Aruch HaShulchan also, the conclusion that they come to is that the mechaber is talking about two specific types of flower pots. When the mechaber discusses here the otzitz she'enoi nakuv, and he says you're not allowed to lower it, you're not allowed to elevate it, he's talking specifically about an earthenware flower pot, cheres, or a wooden flower pot, an otzitz of eitz. Now, there's a Gemara in Menachos talking about bikurim, whole different topic. But the Gemara in Menachos tells us that there's a machlokes, either an otzitz of cheres or an otzitz of eitz is considered to be connected to the ground, even if it's an otzitz she'enoi nakuv. Somehow, either a wooden flower pot, or according to the other pshat, an earthenware flower pot, the plant in the flower pot has the ability to draw yanika, to draw nourishment from the ground, even if it's einoi nakuv. And that's what the mechaber is addressing here. The mechaber is talking specifically about earthenware flower pots and wooden flower pots, and he's telling us that by earthenware flower pots and wooden flower pots, you should not elevate them or lower them, even if it's einoi nakuv, even if it doesn't have a hole, because those types of flower pots have the ability to draw yanika from the ground even without a hole, and they're considered connected to the ground. And therefore, if you elevate it, you're severing the connection, and you're liable, according to Rashi, to the Issa D'Rabbanan. And if you lower it, you're planting it, and you're liable to Zayreya D'Rabbanan. Okay, so against that somewhat complex backdrop, let's take a look here at Sif Ches, 2 lines off the bottom. Kuf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, says the mechaber. Otzitz, a flower pot. Says here in the parentheses, what is an otzitz? Pirush chatzi kad, it's a jug or a barrel cut in half. And now you have a flower pot. Shezorim shamasavim, that they would use to plant grasses or herbs in. Says the mechaber, afilu einoi nakuv, even if it does not have a hole. And like we're saying, we're learning pshat that this means if it's made out of wood or out of cheres. Yesh lizarim militlai me'al gabe karka, you should take care not to elevate it off the ground, ulahanichai al gabe yesedos, and then put it on top of some kind of supporting stakes, even though it's still exposed to the ground. Oy ibcha, or you should be careful not to do the opposite. You should be careful not to take this flower pot off of the stakes and lower it to the ground. Even though you're not initiating any connection to the ground, it was connected to the ground while it was on top of the stakes too, because there's nothing underneath it interposing between it and the ground. You're still not allowed to do this. Yesh lizar, you shouldn't do this. And the mechaber says this is true. Bein shu shel eitz, bein shel cheres, whether it's made out of wood or it's made out of earthenware, out of cheres. Why is the mechaber saying those words? Because again, the Gemara in Menachos, you have a machlokes. Is it the one that's cheres, that's considered connected to the ground even if it doesn't have a hole? Or is it the otzitz of eitz that's considered connected to the ground even without a hole? It's a machlokes in the Gemara and Menachos. The Mechaber is telling us that we should be careful for both shitas, but we're only talking about an otzitz that's made either of cheres or of eitz. If we were talking about an otzitz of matris, let's say we're talking about a metal flower pot, that's an otzitz she'eina nakav. A metal flower pot without a hole, go ahead, elevate it. Go ahead, lower it down. It doesn't matter because there is no connection to the ground. So when you lower it, you're not increasing the connection. When you elevate it, you're not severing any kind of connection. There is no connection because it's a metal flower pot. It's only by an earthenware flower pot, an otzitz of cheres, or a wooden flower pot, an otzitz of eitz. That's when whatever's in the flower pot has the capacity to draw yanika from the ground, even without a hole. It's considered connected, even though it's einoi nakav, and therefore when you lift it up, you're diminishing its capacity to be yonik. When you lower it down, you're increasing its capacity to be yonik, and you would be dealing here with either Zareya D'Rabbanan or Toilish Midrabbanan. For such a complex sif, there's very little Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mem Gimel Afilo Einei Nakav. The Gambazeh Yesh Chash Tlisha Midrabbanan. Even by an otzitz she'einei nakav, there is room for a problem of Tlisha Midrabbanan. Why? Mipnei shemafsik yinikasai ma'at. Because when you elevate it, you are somewhat severing the connection to the ground. You're diminishing the capacity of the plant to be yonik. But certainly if it's an otzitz nakav, you have to be careful. That's the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos talks about an otzitz nakav. An otzitz nakav, yeah, it's connected to the ground. You move it up, you're diminishing the connection. You lower it down, you're increasing the connection. That's what the Gemara is talking about. The Mechaber is introducing us to this Isser by an otzitz she'eina nakav. You're picking it up and you're putting it on stakes. The case that the Mechaber is addressing is even though there is nothing that's interposing between the flower pot and the ground, you're putting it up on supporting stakes, but there's nothing underneath it. If you would pick it up and you would put it on top of a wooden table, or you'd pick it up and you'd put it on top of a piece of canvas, that's a beged, so then you definitely would have a problem. If you were to do this by an otzitz nakav, that would be Toilish Daraisa and Zareya Midaraisa, like I said in the beginning of this year. If you take an otzitz nakav and then you put it on top of something that's a mafsik the connection, that severs the connection between it and the ground, that's Toilish Daraisa. If you expose it to the ground where it wasn't exposed to the ground before, that would be Zareya Daraisa. Valkain, therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, we have to be very careful. When you have some kind of a flower pot with aromatic herbs in it, that many people have in the house, make sure not to pick it up off the ground. Remember, a lot of their houses had earthenware floors. Don't pick it up off the ground and put it on the table. If it's an otzitz nakav, it would be an issa daraisa. If it's an otzitz she'eina nakav, it would be an issa darabanan. Ois kat mem hey, oy lehepech, you can't elevate it, you also can't lower it. Oy ipcha, says the Mishnah Berurah, bishum zayreya. Okay, now let's move along to Sif Tes. Oh no, we didn't finish Sif Ches. We have to do the Ramah, top line, Kuf Pei Aleph Amud Beis, says the Ramah Hagah. Yichur shel ilan, if you have a branch of a tree, shenifshach, may Erev Shabbos min ha'ilon, that has become separated from the tree on Erev Shabbos, uboy peros. So you have an apple tree, and a branch with apples growing on it broke off the tree on Erev Shabbos. So now on Shabbos, you have a branch with apples connected to it. You want to pick an apple off the branch to eat the apple. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to pick an apple off a branch that's not connected to the tree. It's very nice that the apple is connected to the branch, but this is not Toilish Mimakam Gidulai, because the branch can no longer draw nourishment from the tree. The branch is no longer connected to the tree, it's no longer connected to the ground. So this is like when you go to the fruit and vegetable store on Erev Shabbos and you buy those tomatoes on the vine. That's exactly what this is. You have a vine, it's separated from the vine. The tomatoes are attached to the vine. You're allowed to take the tomatoes off the vine. So if you have an apple tree branch, it's separated from the tree. You could take the apples off the branch on Shabbos. That's not a problem. There is an interesting biur halacha over here, a short little biur halacha. Dibra maskil shenifshach me'erev Shabbos. But the Chavetz Chaim says, "Hainu she'enu yachal lichyois oid ha'anaf." This means, you see, the Rama uses a funny word, shenifshach. It doesn't. That's not the word we would generally use to just mean separated. Nifshach is a funny word. Says the Chavetz Chaim that what the Mechaber means is that the branch is separated from the tree to the extent that the branch can no longer draw nourishment from the tree. So it is now a dead branch. What the Chavetz Chaim is saying is, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the branch is entirely separated from the tree. It could be that the branch is broken, the bark is still holding it to the tree, but it could no longer draw nourishment from the tree. So this branch is going to die. It can't draw from the tree anymore. Really, it should be mutter to take apples off of that tree, even though the branch is still somewhat connected to the tree. But, says the biur halacha b'kamakim, yesh lizar bazeh, you should be very careful about this. De'ena olam b'kiyan b'kach. We're not botanists. And we can't look at a branch and paskin on the branch, oh, this is separated enough from the tree that it's going to die. It can no longer draw nourishment. Ve'ein lahatir kiyim kishenifred legamri me'ilon. It brings down the Pri Megadim that we cannot be matir this unless it is completely separated from the tree. Now, if the Chavetz Chaim felt that he was going to paskin that way, why did he mention this at all? I think the reason he mentioned it is because he had to. The Ramah uses this funny word shenifshach. He had to explain what the Ramah meant. So what he meant is, it's not, even if it's not completely separated, really there's room for a heter. Says the biur halacha, yeah, if you're a botanist and you could look and you could really paskin and you know that this is a dead branch, fine, it's one thing. But generally speaking, we don't have that ability, and therefore it's also. Sif Tes, very, very difficult sif. Again, scant Mishnah Berurah. There are shilas that are very negeh lamaisa that flow out of this sif, and really people would have to ask their rav that they ask shilas to for a psak. Let's see what the Mechaber says. Tzinor. Now, a tzinor, loosely translated, is a pipe. It is somewhat difficult to know exactly the scenario that the Mechaber is addressing. I'll tell you the way I think most people generally learn it. I don't agree with that assessment. I happen to think it means something a little bit different, and I'll tell you why. So, tzinor is a pipe. Hamekaleach mayim, that draws water, min hagag, from the roof. So, they had flat roofs. And like our houses have, we have gutters and we have downspouts. That's what we have. We have gutters, downspouts. So tzinor hamakaleach mayim in agag. If you have the gutter or the downspout that draws water, it allows water to flow off the roof. Sha'olu by kashim, and straw, kash, straw, stubble has built up in this pipe. Va'asavim, or grasses, debris. Shesoismim uma'akvim kiluchai, and it is forming a blockage and is preventing the water from running in the pipe. Umeimav yoitzim, so now the water is backing up, it's overflowing. Umispashtim bagag, and it's building up on the roof. V'dolfam labayis, and now you got a leak. So you're sitting Shabbos by the Suda, and it starts leaking inside. You go outside to see what's going on, and you see that this tzinor is blocked up, and because the tzinor is blocked up, the water is backing up on the roof, and now you have a leak in the house. Says the Mechaber, Mema'achon beragloi b'tzina. You could discreetly go to the tzinor, and you could press down the debris with your foot in order to allow the water to flow. Dekevan de misakin al yedei shinoihu, because now you're doing tikkun, whatever kind of repair that you're doing here, you're doing it with a shinoi, you're doing it kalachar yad, she'ena ois ala baraglov, because you're doing it with your foot, b'makom pseida loy gazer rabbanon, it's leaking in the house, it's a makom pseida, things are going to get ruined, b'makom pseida loy gazer rabbanon. Okay. The way most people seem to understand this is that this is talking about a downspout. So you've got a downspout outside that comes off the roof, and the downspout got clogged with kashim and asavim. Says the Mechaber, you could go press down on the debris with your foot in order to unclog the pipe. What would be the isser of doing this? What isser? What malacha? Remember what I've always told you since the beginning of Chela Gimel. When you analyze a shaila of Hilchos Shabbos, the first thing you have to do the math, right? So a shaila comes up. The first question is, well, what malacha would this be? You're questioning if something is mutter or asur on Shabbos. What malacha is this? What is it? So the Mishnah Berurah gives us a very interesting hint. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Kat Memvav. The Mechaber said, what happened over here? The pipe is stuffed up with kashim, which is straw, stubble, va'asavim, and grasses. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kat Memvav, va'asavim, telushin. He brings down from the Pri Begadim, this is a one-word Mishnah Berurah. Telushin. We're talking about grasses that are not connected to the ground. They're not b'mechuber, or they're not connected to the pipe. Remember, we spoke about, let's say, a bucket that you use to draw water from the well, where moss grows on the handle of the bucket. That's considered mechuber. So you could have a tzinor, you could have a pipe that has water in it all the time, that has stuff growing on it. That would be considered mechuber. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about debris that is not connected to anything. We're talking about telushin. And he brings this down from the Pri Begadim. Now, what does this tell us? What does this tell us? What this tells us is that the Chavetz Chaim is letting us know that we're dealing with Isurei D'Rabbanan. We cannot be dealing with an Isur D'Oraisa. What the Mishnah Berurah is telling us is, you should know that the scenario that we're discussing over here is where you have a pipe that is clogged up and you want to unblock it, and by unblocking it, you're going to be over an Isur D'Rabbanan. And what the Mechaber is telling you is, it's an Isur D'Rabbanan? Do it klachayad. Now, what happens when you do an Isur D'Rabbanan klachayad? When you do an Isur D'Rabbanan klachayad, you create a shvus d'shvus. Now it's a double D'Rabbanan. It's only an Isur D'Rabbanan, and you're doing it with a shinui. So now it's a shvus d'shvus. We're talking about a makom pseida. It's leaking into the house. So it's a shvus d'shvus b'makom pseida, a.k.a. a shvus d'shvus b'makom tzarich gadol. A shvus d'shvus b'makom tzarich gadol is mutter. That clearly is the way the Mishnah Berurah is learning this Mechaber. That's why he brought down this Pri Begadim that says that the grass are tolush. Because if the grasses would be b'mechuber, then to unblock the pipe is an Isur D'Oraisa. To unblock the pipe, to do an Isur D'Oraisa with a shinui, that's only a single D'Rabbanan. A single D'Rabbanan b'makom pseida, we're not going to be matir. So learns the Mishnah Berurah according to the Pri Begadim that Siftes over here is talking about where you want to do an Isur D'Rabbanan in order to unblock the pipe. Now, what Isur D'Rabbanan are you doing? So l'chayre, the Isur D'Rabbanan is nireh k'misakein. To do an actual repair, especially to do an actual repair on a tzinar, on a pipe that's connected to a house is mechuber. This could be, if it was a real repair, it could be baina. It wouldn't even be tikkun maneh. Tikkun maneh is if you're repairing a keli. But if you're doing a repair on a house that's mechuber l'karka, that's the Isur D'Oraisa of baina. That's one of the lamites malachas. But over here, we're not saying that this is tikkun gamor. It's not a real repair. It's a nireh k'misake. So it's an Isur D'Rabbanan. So you're doing an Isur D'Rabbanan, says the Mechaber, do it with a shinui, shvus d'shvus. Shvus d'shvus b'makom pseida is a shvus d'shvus b'makom tzarich gadol. Shvus d'shvus b'makom tzarich gadol is mutter. Now, I mentioned to you, most people seem to learn that this is talking about a downspout. I have a very hard time thinking that this is talking about a downspout, and I'll tell you why. But before I tell you why, let's do the next Mishnah Berurah, Mishnah Berurah's Kat Mem Zayin. Because one of the reasons I dispute that this is talking about a downspout is because of Mishnah Berurah's Kat Mem Zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mema'achon. What does Mema'achon mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Pirish, Darsan, it means you step on it and press it down. Umashpilon, and you lower it, beraglov, with your foot. V'kosav me'iri perichavis de lahasiram. If you want to mamish unblock the pipe, heina v'heina, by pushing the debris this way and that way, asar afilu beragloi, it would be asar to do that even with your foot. Now, Rabbi say, if we're talking about a downspout, does this discussion make sense? You go up to the roof, you have a leak in your dining room, you go up to the roof, and you see that the downspout, so it's a vertical pipe, you see that the downspout is blocked. Says the mechaber, memachon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does ma'achon mean? It means you could press it down with your foot. What, you're sticking your foot into the downspout? And you're pushing all the debris. What are you doing? You're sticking your whole leg down the downspout to push everything through the pipe? If there's a blockage at the top of the downspout, and you use your foot to push it in, all you're doing is you're pushing the blockage further down this downspout. And also, what does the me'iri mean? The Mishnah Berurah brings the me'iri, that lasira meheina v'heina, to use your foot to push it this way and that way, to push the blockage to the side, says the me'iri, that's osir. The me'iri says that's also to do even with your foot. What's going on here? So I dispute that this is talking about a downspout. I think that this is talking about a gutter. It's not talking about a horizontal pipe, a vertical pipe. It's talking about a horizontal pipe. So imagine you have the roof, and at the edge of the roof, there is a horizontal half pipe that the water flows off the roof, flows into that half pipe, and from there, either it's pitched and it flows off the roof, or it flows into a downspout. But your problem is that the tzinar, the gutter, the horizontal gutter, is blocked. And now when you go, what happens when the horizontal gutter is blocked? When the horizontal gutter is blocked, it's level with the roof. Now that it's level with the roof, it can't take any water and direct it off the roof, right? The water just builds up. So what do? You want to go up to the roof. You want to take your foot. You want to put it into the open top of the half pipe of the gutter, and you want to push it down. You want to push the debris down, so now there's room for the water to go in and flow off the roof. And that, the mechaber says, is not a real tikkun. You're not really making a repair. And it's only a nirek kimisakein. It's an issa d'Rabbanan. You're doing a klachayad. The shvus makom tzar gadol. It's mutter. Says the me'iri, but what if you don't want to just press it down? What if you want to put your foot into the drain, into the half pipe, and you want to push the debris side to side, heina v'heina. You want to push the debris out. That already, says the me'iri, is aser. Now, why is it aser? There's two ways you could look at it. First of all, maybe to use your foot to mamish take the debris out of the gutter, maybe that's no longer nirek k'misake. Maybe that's already starting to fit into a real tikkun. And if it's a real tikkun, now it would only be a single d'Rabbanan. If it's a real tikkun, that's a daraisa. You're doing a klachayad, it's a single d'Rabbanan. Maybe that's the problem. Or maybe it's not even considered klachayad. Maybe if you're using your foot to mamish clear out the blockage, that's not an unusual way of doing things. Maybe it's not klachayad, and then maybe it's a single shvus, not a shvus to shvus. I had another raya. Maybe I'll be able to tell you that raya tomorrow. I had this same issue when I was writing Mishnah Elucidated for Art Scroll on a Mishnah in Shabbos, where also I came up against this issue. Is the Mishnah talking about the downspout or the horizontal gutter? But I have to remember, I have to look in my notes. Okay. Now, I told you that there's a very common shaila, halacha l'maisa, that flows out of this sif. And that is the question of plunging a toilet on Shabbos. L'chayra, plunging a toilet is, in many ways, this sif. You have a pipe that's supposed to direct wastewater somewhere, and it gets clogged. Okay, says the mechaber over here, you could do it klachayad with your foot. It's not a real tikkun. Are you allowed to plunge a toilet? Are you not allowed to plunge a toilet? There is a famous psak that's brought down. It's a psak al peh. It's not biksav. It's not in the Igris. There is a reported from somebody who's definitely trustworthy, from somebody who's certainly a neman, who says that Rav Moshe Zechat Tzadik Livracha said that you're allowed to plunge a toilet on Shabbos. Having said that, Reb David was Reb Moshe's son, Reb David Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was very, very, very not happy with that idea. He never heard it from his father, and it's not Piksav. And Reb David held that to really plunge a toilet that's really clogged could be an Issa Daraisa. Why an Issa Daraisa? Because again, it's Mechuba L'Karka, so it's a repair on something that's Mechuba L'Karka. It would be a Shaila of Baina. So Reb David was very, very machmir. A very reliable Pesach that I spoke to today, who's very familiar with the reported psak of Rav Moshe and with the halacha here in Shin Lamed Vav, and with what Reb David had to say. He told me that he is matir if it's a very simple blockage. If you could take the plunger, you could give one plunge, and you could unblock it, he's matir that, because he holds that that's not even a tikkun. In other words, it's not a broken toilet. Everybody has plunger. Why does everybody have a plunger in their house? Not only does everybody have a plunger in their house, I know lots of people who have 3 floors or 2 floors, and they have bathrooms on each floor. They have a little plunger in every bathroom. Why? Apparently, this is very common. Toilets get clogged. So it's not a broken toilet. Toilets get clogged, and you just give a shtup, and you knock out the blockage. It's not called a tikkun. It's not a tikkun at all. And this is one of the reasons why I made a very big deal about the downspout. Is it a downspout or is it a gutter? If it's a downspout, then knocking out a simple blockage would be more like a toilet. And I could see where that wouldn't be so much misakin. Where if it's a horizontal pipe, when a horizontal pipe that I'm describing, that horizontal gutter, when it gets clogged, it's gone. There is no pipe there anymore. That's more of a repair. Cleaning out the gutters is not something like I say with the toilet. Everybody keeps a plunger by every toilet, right? Cleaning out the gutter is not, sure, every couple of weeks you got to go up. No. Gutters are meant to work for a long time. Eventually they get clogged. And when they get clogged, you call it uman and you have it repaired. So, again, I would urge anybody who has that shiloh, go ask a shiloh to the Rav that you ask your shilohs to. Okay. Wow. We're 37 minutes in, and we've got a lot left on this page. So let's go weiter. Sif Yud. What comes next is really the rest of the page is relatively simple. Let's see if we could move through it quickly. Says the Mechaber Sif Yud, 4 lines down. Hadas mechuber. You have a hadas. Well, we're just coming off of Sukkot. We know what a hadas is. You have a hadas, and it is still connected to the bush. It's connected to the ground. Mutar l'hariach bay. You're allowed to walk by, and you're allowed to smell the hadasim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Ches. Mutar l'hariach. You're allowed to smell the hadas while it's mechuber l'karka. The loishayich lemigzar shema yokutz. We're not going to make a gzeira to say that if we allow you to smell it, you might come to cut it off and do toilish. Kevin Chainer writes alak l'hariach because all you want to do is smell it. V'zeh yochel hu lasei saf b'mechuber. It's just as easy to smell it while it's b'mechuber as if you detach it. So go ahead, smell it. We're not afraid that you're going to head and you're going to go ahead and cut it off. V'yesh machmirin b'zeh. However, there are those who are machmir. V'kasabel Yerabba, the Yerabba writes to Iker Kipsaka Shulchan Aruch that the Iker halacha follows the psak of the Shulchan Aruch that this is mutter. Well, Indian the taltaloi biyadoi. How about handling the hadas while it's mechuber l'karka? Is it like an elon, a tree? You're not allowed to go and handle. The tree is muktzah. Are you allowed to go handle the hadas while it's mechuber l'karka? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Dinai Kamala El Indian Kanam Harakib Sif Aleph. Back in the beginning of this Siman in Sif Aleph, we spoke about the muktzah status and the status of being mishtamish, of making use of very soft and bendable and flexible bushes and reeds, etc. Ayin Sham. Let's go back into the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber Viter Sif Yud. 5 lines down. Aval, esrig v'tapuach. Again, we just came off of Sukkot. An esrig or a tapuach or an apple. V'chol davar haroy la'achila. Any kind of fruit that is roy la'achila, that's edible. Asur l'hariach b'y b'mechuber. You wouldn't even be allowed to smell it while it's attached to the tree. Shema yakoitz oisay la'achloi. You go see a beautiful apple on the tree. Are you allowed to go smell it? No. Why? Because it's very edible. If you smell it, oh, this smells good, you might come to pluck it and eat it. By the hadas, we're not afraid that you're going to smell it. Oh, this smells good. You're going to pluck it and what? You don't eat hadassim, but an apple you might pluck to eat. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut memtes. The fear over here is yakay tzay la'achlay. Now, frekt the Mishnah Berurah. Wait a second. By the hadas, we said it's mutter to smell the hadas. Why? Because we're not afraid that you're going to pick the hadas. All you want to do is smell it. You could smell it while it's attached to the tree. Asks the Mishnah Berurah, well, guess what? You could eat the apple while it's attached to the tree. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chi tema, hanami yakal anoshche b'fiv min ha'mechuber. You could go eat it while it's attached to the tree. So why are we afraid that you might come to pick it? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, no, because to bite it while it's attached to the tree would be usher. Ein lecha tlisha gedoyla mizu. He brings this down from a Rashi in Masechta Sukkah, that biting it while it's on the tree would be called tailish. That would be tailish daraisa. V'lachein, and therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh limchais, we must object, biyad hatoyim, in the hands of those who make a mistake. V'holchem leginois b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov, they go for a stroll in the garden on Shabbos and Yom Tov, v'koitvim peris min ha'mechuber, and they mamish pluck apples off the tree, v'oichlem, and they eat them. Umavad iser talisha, besides the fact that to be being over in iser darais of toilish, asurim gam kedachakach ba'achila lakol b'Shabbos. After you do the iser daraisa of toilish, now it's aser ba'achila, because you did an iser daraisa. So now you're not allowed to eat it until after Shabbos. The Chavetz Chaim goes so far as to say that we should appoint people in the gardens to stop people from doing this. Moving along to Sif Yod Aleph, says the Mechaber. Somebody who puts wheat kernels or barley kernels into water to soak. Somebody who puts grains into water to soak on Shabbos. This would be a tolada of the malacha of zareya, of planting. V'chayiv, and it would be chayiv achatos. It's a daraisa. B'chol shehu, even in the most minute amount. So you take one barley corn and you put it into water to soak on Shabbos. Iser daraisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah cutting on hashoyreh. Why are you soaking it? So says the Mishnah Berurah, when is this an Issa Daraisa? If you do it, Kadeshi Yisrakechu v'yatzmichu, if you do it in order to soften it so that it should sprout, Kederach sheshoyred ezet tvuos kaidam hazriya. So if you do this b'mechuvin, it's not a davar she'ein miskaven. If you do it b'mechuvin, you took the barley, you put it into water because you want it to germinate, you want it to soak. That would be an Issa Daraisa. He's cutting on Aleph. Toleda Zereya would be a Tolada of the Malach of Zereya. The Ma Zereya Mechaven La'atzmuche Peri. The purpose of Zereya, of planting, is to make things grow. Av Zekain, also over here, you're making it sprout. The Kasa B'Chayadam, the Chayadam writes, Tu Adin Asher Tu Alasis Mehen Moltzen L'Sheichar. If somebody wants to soak barley in order to create malt, in order to make beer, Chayiv, that would be this Daraisa. The Yadua de Kavanase La'atzmiach. When you make malt, you're making sprouted barley. So your kavana is that it should sprout. So that would be an Issa Daraisa. Because of Oid, and the Chayadim writes further, the Tekav Bishadasa Lamayim Chayiv, you're over the Issa Daraisa as soon as you put it in the water. Even though it's going to take several days until it sprouts. So Messiah. And the Chayadim concludes, but you're allowed to soak grain in order so that your animal should be able to eat it. Why? First of all, over there you're not soaking it so that it should sprout. You only want to soften it so that the animal could easily eat it. And pashtus, it's never going to sprout. You're putting it in front of the animal for the animal to eat it. So, it's a davar she'ein miskaven, because your kavana is not that it should sprout, and it's not a psik reisha, because even if the animal doesn't eat so much and he leaves some over, that's not a psik reisha. Your intent was that the animal should eat it all. So it's definitely not a psik reisha that there's going to be something left to sprout. V'dan, you should know, this discussion is germane to types of seeds that do not become mixed with the water. What does that mean? But if we're dealing with types of grain or types of seeds that bind together, that's what the words nislim zebazeh, they adhere to each other. If we're talking about grains that soften up and then they form a mass, they form one single mass, because they combine through the agency of the liquid. Kamei kashinin, like the animal fodder called kashinim, which the English word that they use always is vetch. The kayotza bazeh, or similar substances, shemisrakichin, that soften up to the extent, v'nimuchim sham, they melt down, v'hamayim misabim b'sibasam, and the water becomes thick. V'nasim kemayim she'isoi kemach belulim b'soicha, it becomes like water that dough or flour was soaked in. Also, you wouldn't be allowed to soak these kind of substances for your animal. Mishum lush. Now you would come up against an issa daraisa of lush. Raisins or other dried fruits, you're allowed to soak them on Shabbos because they're not going to sprout, and there's going to be no problem of lush. They're not going to combine. But remember, you're not allowed to do any pickling because that would be bishul. Ice cotton and bays, the Mechaber said, if you put in these grains in water to soak, you're chayav b'kol shehu. What does that mean, l'kol shehu? Even if you take one grain and soak it in water, that would be an iser da'araisa. We're going to pause over here. We'll continue next time with the Ramah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua Sefuras Parnasim Shaduchim to Los Indeed. We should be zeicher to see the Biaskel Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu amen. Be well.